Wish you could fish more, anywhere, anytime. RODgeeks, a St. Croix rods partner, has developed a 42-inch one-piece travel rod designed and built with the same technology found in St. Croix rods. This travel rod is offered as a kit that comes with the RG42 rod, spinning reel, fishing line, pliers, and tackle tray. All in a case with space for your wallet, phone, and fishing license. Just grab and go. Perfect to keep in your pickup, car, or RV. This shorty performs much like a longer rod, but is compact enough for easy storage and for on-the-go use. Make this the summer you fish more. RODgeeks.com. Guidefitter is the industry network for professional outdoor guides and outfitters, the trusted destination for consumers seeking and sharing guided hunting and fishing experiences of a lifetime, and the enterprise influencer marketing platform for outdoor brands. Guidefitter and its members represent the pulse of the guided hunting and fishing industry. Guidefitter's outdoor partners provide discounts to select types of outdoor professionals, including game wardens, members of the military, guides, outfitters, and other outdoor professionals. Over 145 brand partners and counting. Gear across many categories, including packs, footwear, clothing, flashlights, knives, optics, even firearms and ammo. For more information, go to guidefitter.com/wardenswatch. That's Wardenswatch, all one word. I'm Game Warden Wayne Saunders, and I'm a member of Guidefitter. This podcast is brought to you by Maine Operation Game Thief. Please join me, Game Warden Wayne Saunders, and other game wardens on our adventures, protecting wildlife, saving lives, and having fun, all while serving the public and the natural resources of our planet. Listen to the tales and experiences of those who work in the outdoors while being entertained with stories about encounters with poachers, wildlife investigation, murder investigation, near-death experiences, search and rescue missions, wildlife interactions from game wardens around the country and around the world. When I retired, I realized I couldn't let go of that legacy, but rather wanted to share the passion, the commitment, and the stories of those men and women that call themselves game wardens. This is Game Warden Wayne Saunders, and this is Warden's Watch. Hey, Happy New Year, everybody. And no matter when you're listening to this podcast, we are coming in to 2020. We are on the brim. Tomorrow, we are going to be when you hear this podcast, this Warden's Watch podcast, we are going to be in 2020. So Happy New Year, everybody. Get those New Year's resolutions out there. Stick to them. Get healthier. Get outside. Get outside. That's what I get. Experience the outdoors, no matter what you love to do, whether it's hiking, whether it's fishing, whether it's playing with your dog, whether it's walking down by the brook, whether it's getting out there and getting in the mud. You know, just enjoy the outdoors because it is vast and it is an awesome place and it's where we belong. Your spirit belongs outside. So enjoy. Not even a year with Warden's Watch podcast. Not even. March is when we launched. March. So we haven't even hit a year. We're going to hit a year in March, and we're going to do some special stuff in March as well. But during the 2019, we have just had so much success with Warden's Watch. We have been, promoting international wildlife crime stoppers, Operation Game Thieves around the country, departments, the law enforcement divisions, and the game wardens. The most important thing is to promote this job, to recruit people, to support those out there doing a dynamic job for our nation, for North America, for the world. Those wardens that are out there on the front lines protecting our natural resources and getting those stories to you so you can hear them, so you can get excited about protecting our natural resources. So, and get involved as well, because with those, you can get involved with IWC. You can be a member of International Wildlife Crime Stoppers for $35 for the year. $35. I'm trying to think what I spend on $35 on, and it's not a whole lot. So, but I can be part of the solution for $35 a year. InternationalWildlifeCrimeStoppers.org or WildlifeCrimeStoppers.org. Go there, check it out, become a part of the solution, become a part of the fight. And I just want to thank them for their support through this opening up of Warden's Watch. There's a lot of other people that have been support podcasters. My producer, Jay Scott, has his own podcast called Big Butt Registry.
He has been such a resource for me. We wouldn't have the quality that we have with Wardens Watch without Jay Scott, and we wouldn't have all the experience that Jay brings. And the nice thing is he brings an outside influence to me. Because if you guys ever know, if you have police friends or game warden friends, sometimes we can have a little narrow vision. Sometimes we see the world through police glasses, but we need that anchor. We need that outside friend, that outside influence to bring us back to where the general public is, where the hunters are, where the fishermen, where the outdoor people are. And we need to anchor ourselves in those people so we don't have just a narrow view. And Jay brings that to Wardens Watch. Sometimes I think things are boring. I'm like, Jay, what do you think of that? Oh, it's awesome. It's great. Boy, it's just because I'm looking at him through game warden's eyes. He's like, the general public doesn't know that. Because it's common knowledge to you, Wayne, doesn't mean it's common knowledge to them. And he just brings so much in. The other podcaster, I just want to give a shout out there. It's Ben Page, the Foul Front Podcast. If you are a duck hunter, get Ben's podcast. Ben Page does an outstanding job and a hard worker. Man, this guy is probably the hardest working podcaster I know. Sorry, Jay. This guy just produces. He's got a passion for getting the information out to you. And if you're a waterfowl hunter, Ben Page, the Foul Front, definitely. Ben supported me with chiming out there. I'm on his top 10 list of podcasts, and just a constantly promoter for Wardens Watch. And I really appreciate that. Giving me technical information, giving me inspiration, and giving me listeners as well. Ben, thanks a lot. I appreciate your friendship. I appreciate your opinions, and heck of a job with the Foul Front podcast. Just great work. We're going to get right into it. So we are going to knock this out. 2020. We are going to start with an anniversary celebration. 140 years of conservation law enforcement in the state of New York. Doesn't get any better. As we have these significant birthdays around the country and we learn the history of our agencies that are committed to protecting our resources. And here, the men and women that came before actually, sacrificed a lot for public safety, for our resources, for our states, and for our North America. So there's a lot of stories out there, and this is just part of it. It's part of our heritage. So I think it's a really unique thing that I could get together with a historian from New York State Environmental Conservation Police and get this story out to you guys. And we're going to start it off. The first podcast of 2020, episode 24 for Wardens Watch. And I don't know about you, but I get excited about history. I watch the History Channel way too much. Yes, way too much. That's the kind of stuff I like. And I just love hearing how we started, how we cut through, to protect our nation's resources. Whether we started on the coast protecting our fish because we saw that as a resource that we needed to feed our colonies. And then we came in and the deer were getting decimated. So we became deer deputies and trying to start protecting our natural resources just as far as America started. And nationwide, North America has a reputation for that. An awesome reputation for protecting its resources. So here's one of the stories, New York Environmental Conservation. Hope you enjoy the first episode of 2020, Wardens Watch episode 24. Thanks for listening. Share it with your friends. On this episode of Wardens Watch, we are going to celebrate with the New York State Environmental Conservation Police, because they are hitting 140th years in 2020. And that's exciting because that's a long time. And we are with the historian for the Environmental Police, Capt Caifa, which is pretty cool just to have a historian and that position. And I think every department should have that position because we do have a lot of history. And I think we lose so much history, Tom. And welcome to Wardens Watch. Tom is a captain, right?
Yep. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So you're a captain with an environmental conservation officer, and you're a historian. Now, you weren't a captain. You were a historian before you were a captain, right?
Correct. Yep.
So that's just something that we talked about this earlier on how you became a historian. So maybe we start off with that. I mean, it takes a special person.
Yeah, a special person. You could say that.
Yeah.
And Tom, if you look at Tom, he's not old and stuffy like you might think a historian like the librarian. So
Depends on what day it is.
yeah, you're right. You're right. So, but it just takes a special person. So, and how long you been doing that for?
So, 2007 was when I picked up the job officially.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to think back. It wasn't very long. It happened very organically for me. When I came on, and I was always kind of interested in history stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I had only been on the job a couple of years. And what happened was one of the older warden lieutenants had given me a stack of old patches. And I forget how we got even talking about it, but we had talked about some old stuff in history, and he had some patches laying around at his house. And so the next time I came into the office, he gave me a bunch of these old patches. And that kind of got me started with kind of collecting. And I do collect uniform patches, just fish and game stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of got me into that world. And from there, I just kind of got thinking naturally about history and, when were these patches used? When do I have the first one? Does anybody have the first one? And things like that. And that's when I first found out that we had a historian. And at the time, his name was Eric Haslam. He was our historian. He was an officer, a conservation officer. I reached out to Eric, and I just started kind of bugging him a little bit, about
wanted to know the history of this and
asking
that,
him questions and asking him if I could help him with things. And like a lot of us, we're very busy all the time.
Right.
Whether you're an officer, a lieutenant, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And, after a while, Eric was kind of like, once he felt me out a little bit, he was like, yeah, I could use the help, and so I helped him with some smaller projects. And when it came time for Eric to retire, a couple of years later, he kind of recommended me to the director at the time and said, this is probably the person that should take over because he truly has an interest.
Mm-hmm.
And so it kind of just happened naturally.
Kind of just happened.
And I think that's the best way for it to happen because we have a lot of stuff, and you saw it out in the...
Yes, we did a photograph.
In the lobby there where a lot of old uniforms, old hats,
mm-hmm.
The old fur hats, the old Stetsons.
The old beaver fur hat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So much of that stuff is, if you don't take care of it, it degrades very
mm-hmm.
fast. And
that's why we have museums.
Yeah.
Do you have a museum?
We don't have a museum in New York.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, we just purchased a new academy building, so hopefully there'll be a space in there that we can kind of use as
great idea.
A display area,
mm-hmm.
And we can kind of do things a little more museum-like there.
Yeah.
Because even here, I take care of everything. If I find any old uniforms, and I get in touch with old retirees all the time, and if I get anything older, like an old uniform, I'll go dry clean it and just make sure it's nice.
But that's a great place to have a museum because it shows those new recruits their roots. It shows them the beginning.
Yeah. And in our old academy, our current academy that we have now, there are displays here and there.
Uh-huh.
There just isn't a lot of room for it.
Right.
We're very fortunate here in New York, and I have to give props to our very first historian, which his name was Jim Ponzio. And so the director back in the 80s was kind of visionary in that he said, we really need a historian. And Jim, a lot of old collectors will know Jim. Jim is a collector. He was that guy. And I still meet people all around, game wardens all around the country that remember trading with Jim.
Yeah.
And so he was kind of like a natural fit for the first historian.
Uh-huh.
And so all the way back in the 80s, we had a historian in place, and Eric Haslam took over from Jim when Jim retired.
Nice.
And so we've accumulated a lot of stuff over the years, and stuff you want to keep, of course we get multiples, we have tons and tons of old uniforms, and you kind of pare it down, but still how it is in any law enforcement division like ours. You go through periods where things change, you get something different, you get something new.
Right.
The old sealskin hats kind of go out of style.
Right, exactly.
But everybody wants to keep their sealskin hat,
Yeah.
So,
or everybody wants a different jacket.
And
jackets are a big thing.
People get a different jacket, and then maybe that becomes the iconic
technology
jacket for
changes
10, 20
too.
years. Yep.
Technology, what we do, what we wear, how we do it, what we use to it. So all that changes.
Yeah. So we've accumulated a lot of stuff.
Yeah. But 140 years ago, what did they start off with? When you talk about 100 stuff, I mean, they didn't start off a whole lot 140 years ago, did they?
Not much, no. Back then, they basically got a law book, some blank tickets, and that was about it.
So the first guys ever, they actually, I mean, just the fact that they got some tickets is probably pretty good.
And they didn't look like much, you know what I mean? Much more than pieces of paper, but
right.
But that's all they got. Were some papers. Here's the law book. Here's some little like daily diary entries, so you can write down what you did every day. Here's your tickets for court.
So
go
describe
forth and conquer.
To me and everybody else, the first New York State Environmental Conservation Officer, police officer 130 years ago. What did he look like? What did he use? And what did he address?
He just looked like any other guy. You know, he had no special equipment. You know, that all was on him to provide.
And back then, they probably provided a wheel gun. Or did they weren't even armed?
No, you had to provide your own gun.
Yeah.
If you even wanted a gun, you provided your own stuff.
Yeah.
If you wanted a billy club, you bought the billy club or whatever you had. Now most of those guys were picked, you know, because they were pretty good outdoorsmen. So they had canoes, they had their own horses and carriages, and they could get around. So they kind of knew what they were doing in the outdoors, and they kind of picked and choose, you know, what they thought they should have as far as rain gear, outdoor stuff, boots.
Yeah.
But New York State didn't really give them anything, you know. I don't think we knew what to give them at the time. It was all very new.
So, but they had the desire, which is huge to start with any game warden.
They did, and there was only 8 in the beginning, and they spread them out pretty well around the state.
They did. Statewide, 8 of them.
Statewide, 8 of them. And even though they were spread out kind of evenly around the state, they could go anywhere in the state. You would almost think it would make more sense that, you know, the guy in Rochester would stay around Rochester, but
you would think so.
But not necessarily. They would end up wherever
needed,
wherever the case took them.
Okay.
You know, so
if they had somebody from New York City come up and shoot a whole bunch of deer, and they'd go back to New York City to follow that investigation, or
they would
follow it,
cross around everywhere.
What were some of those first rules that came for enforcement?
I don't think you mean between,
like, don't shoot 50 deer. I just think of
the laws.
Our beginnings are very broad, you know, and it's the beginning of acknowledgement that it's a resource that we can abuse that can go away. So, you know, I think of market hunting and ducks and market hunting for deer and all of that. So the first laws, I think, nationwide were very broad. So what do you think they were targeting when they first started?
By the time we came around, you know, and this was 1880, things were not looking good already, you know.
Right.
You know, the Labrador duck, which is an odd-looking critter, you know, had already been gone extinct. The last one was shot on Long Island. The heath hen was gone. The eastern elk was gone. Deer were down into record lows. Turkey as well. Turkey were a rare sight for a while. So, you know, they were just thinking they were thinking more in a fish and wildlife mode than anything else. You know, what can we do to bring back the deer and the turkey and to help the trout, and, you know, to get people to stop. It was kind of twofold. It was to get people to stop taking things in mass, you know, in an unsportsmanlike way. But there was also a backdoor focus on how do we get big companies to stop dumping into the streams? How do we get big companies to stop clear cutting all the forests so the habitat's gone? So even way back then, there was an idea that it wasn't just, we weren't just after, you know, the poachers. We were also kind of had one eye on the companies that were destroying things in another way.
Right.
So, and it was a lot to think about, and I'm sure the first guys thought about it quite a bit. There's a story that I found in one of the books, and it's a true story about how they all, after a while of this, 8 of them kind of crossing the New York State here, there, and everywhere, and not really knowing what the others are doing necessarily, they all got together and they had a meeting in Albany, an informal meeting, and they all decided on their own, maybe we should just kind of stick to home and kind of split the state up into little pieces. And they did that on their own.
Yeah.
You know, no one told them to do that.
Well, after probably their 10th trip here or there, they were about, you know, we're talking Model A's, Model T's.
Yeah, or just horse and carriage.
Horse and carriage.
Yeah. So they kind of made it up as they went along. You know? We talked about the laws. You know, the first laws, there weren't many of them. But the rules were really it's more of an interesting thing. The rules between officers.
Uh-huh.
You know, how do I work with you? How do I even find you if I need you? You know, how are you handling? It's the first time this has ever been done, right? So how are you handling it as compared to how I'm handling it?
Uh-huh.
And it must have been a very trying time for all of them. You know,
Absolutely.
and they're all appointed people. You know, they can be removed on a whim. So they also have to think about
the politics of it.
The politics of it more than anybody does nowadays.
Right. Yeah, because we have all those rules established and everything.
Yeah.
Now, so we have a basis to form off of. So they were blazing new trails.
They were. And if you look back, all the way up until the 30s, it was very rare to see a conservation officer, a game protector that we were called back then. It was very rare to find a game protector that worked 10 years. They usually lasted a couple of years and then
got burnt out.
They would not necessarily get burnt out. They might.
Yeah.
But they might, the political winds change and then all of a sudden, somebody else needs a job. And so
what were the first guys paid?
Trying to think of what they were paid in the beginning. It wasn't much. It was $500 a year. That's what they made in the very beginning, which if you adjusted it for now, that'd be about making $14,000 today.
Yeah, that's what. Thank you for doing that, because that was going to be my next question in today's day. What is that? So a lot of you guys probably had other jobs as well as game protectors.
They all had other jobs.
Yeah. It was just kind of like the judges. They're judges, but they're also the local gun owner, gun store owner, or the local store owner. So the local barber, but they do the judge thing on the side. So, and that's how all of our roots kind of started that way. But what impresses me that, and you brought it up, New York had the foresight for companies and things like that. And when I think of New York, I spent a little time here. Went to SUNY Cobleskill. New York always had could see the future with the Catskills and the Adirondacks by creating those parks. And then, like, their water system for New York City just amazes me. Being in the Catskills, I got to see some of that structure from the turn of the century. They made it big.
Yeah.
I mean, did they know New York City was going to be New York City back then? Because they made everything huge that could accommodate. And it just blows my mind that they had that much foresight. And it sounds like even when it came to game protectors, they had that foresight and starting it off in protection and focusing on companies dumping things into the waterways and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, it was, everything happened there first, and spread out from there. So, yeah, New York City was very pivotal in our history, and it still is. We have ECOs in New York City, and they have a job to do. There's a lot going on there. And not just with environmental quality stuff, but with the fish markets, and the ocean, and there's a lot there.
The illegal trade that comes in and out of it.
There's JFK, all this stuff that comes through. About the ivory, you see it. Yes. That's like the
big thing.
Issue du jour, right?
Yeah,
ivory. So, New York City is really it's like a test ground. So back then, things that were happening in New York City were that's where it all kind of branched out from. So
it's been the hub for 140 years and still is.
Yeah. So, I mean, all these guys, these market hunters that would shoot, everything they could. If they weren't eating it, they were selling it in New York City.
Absolutely.
And that's actually, the origin behind some of these laws on market hunting was because of how big of a market New York City was for everything. And probably not just for our state either, for, people would cross state lines and bring stuff over there. That's just where the market was.
Right. And I think even the Chesapeake Bay, they were shooting ducks, putting them on trains and shipping them to New York City.
Yeah.
And everywhere else in between.
Yeah.
That's like you said, the market hunting. That was the way. You went down to the market. There was ducks hanging there. You bought your ducks and you went home, whether you plucked them or they were already plucked. And that's the way food came across. Not like today with the supermarket, it's all wrapped up for you.
Yeah. And companies would can wild meat back then. Wild game would get canned there's a good story, and I wish I had it in front of me. I don't, but you
can paraphrase.
But, Chef Boyardee, before it was, the SpaghettiOs company, it started out as a regular, more of a conventional company. And Chef Boyardee, the Boyardee that you see on a can right now is a very Americanized and an advertising kind of slogan type thing. It was originally, the chef's name, he was an Italian named Boyardee, Boirdi. Boyardee, Boiardi. So that's who he was, Chef Boyardee. And that's how the company started. That's how it was marketed, you know, and he didn't just do, you know, Italian food. He actually was, there was a time when he was canning wild game, you know, and the company, and I can't even think of the year now, but very early on in New York City, they were fined thousands and thousands of dollars for illegally canning wild game.
Wow.
You know, and so it's kind of funny. And you think of Chef Boyardee now, you think of SpaghettiOs, but
I never will again. But you're right. That's their claim to fame is SpaghettiOs. But I never knew that backstory to Chef Boyardee.
Yeah, there's, you know, some of these companies, there's a history and an origin to them that's different than how it is now.
Right, because the times change. But getting fined for illegally canning wild game, and they probably didn't even know what they were eating back then. It was just wild game in a can. Here you go.
It could be.
Canned duck or canned goose, or
they would tell you it was something. You know?
Canned wild meat. It could have been muskrat or beaver.
Yeah.
No doubt. But that's really neat. So as we graduate through the years, you know, how does the New York's DEC police change, and how do they grow? And
they, like everything else, I think we grew in fits and starts.
Uh-huh.
You know, the first 8 guys, it was very apparent, you know, early on that 8 wasn't enough.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you're not going to go from 8 to 100, but the numbers started increasing gradually over time. And, you know, there really is no formula to it. You know, it's really hard to quantify for you.
Right.
You know, but we pick up another 10 guys here, 20 guys there. You know, something would happen. Maybe, you know, like in the 20s, a study would come out about how the populations are starting to improve, and then, you know, the political winds would change a little, and then we get another 50 guys all of a sudden.
Okay.
Or like when, you know, the World War II ends and the nation goes through a whole era of prosperity, and everybody, you know, it's the big boom of the sportsmen. You know, everybody's got money, everybody's got some extra free time, you know, because the work week changes and weekends off, and that whole culture gets people hunting more, gets people fishing more. So then, of course, you have more hunting accidents, and then you see more boating accidents, and then you get a big influx of law enforcement to take care of those problems. So if you look throughout our history, you see where things kind of they stay stagnant for a little while, and then there's a jump, and then stagnant for a while, and then there's a jump.
And,
you know?
And how did it grow? I mean, are you stronger today as far as numbers than you were in the 30s and the 70s? Is it ebbed and tide, or?
We've grown, and like I said, we've grown, you know, at an irregular rate for most of our history. We've leveled off. It's probably been since the late 80s that we haven't really gotten bigger. You know, but we're a little over 300 right now.
Okay.
So, and for some states, that's amazing. You know, I talked to somebody in Nevada, you know, where they have what,
they have like
30 something
32,
guys.
I think.
Yeah, and they're like, holy cow, you know.
But when you think of the population, which drives it, I mean, California has just as many, but you look at the populations, and population creates problems for wildlife and the controversies of that. So, or pollution. So I think that's why I think you see growth and non-growth, and unfortunately, you know, my state has reduced since the 60s and the 70s. 70s we were 50 strong, and today we're not that close. So we're more 40ish, which when you look at what we're doing, becoming police in the woods, because every podcast I say we're police in the woods, just because people are gravitating and changing. In the 30s they're hunting, in the 60s they're hunting, and now not so much. It's starting to tip over. And I think in the future we're going to have less hunting and more outdoor recreation, more search and rescue as far as New Hampshire goes. But it's just the change of it. And you guys, you know, we're more of the traditional. You guys address pollution on a large scale. Yeah,
and it's kind of a unique thing for. We're not the only state, but there are very few states where the conservation officers, game wardens, whatever you want to call us, there are very few states where we kind of do both sides of the fence as far as the natural resources go. You know, there's the fish and wildlife side, and then there's that other side, the EQ side, with dumping and air quality and water quality. And we're one of the few states that kind of does both. That's been great for us in some ways. It has allowed us, since the 60s, when we kind of absorbed all that, and that's when we changed our name from game protector to conservation officer. It was 1964. And that was all about at the times, you know, the green movement,
right?
You know, save the planet,
Yeah.
Earth Day, all that started late 60s into the 70s. And that's where we absorbed all these other laws that were kind of here, there, and everywhere, and put it all together into the environmental conservation law. And then, of course,
it sounds like
going to enforce
the roots were that way, though,
right?
too. I mean, it sounds like, even in the beginning, there was people dumping a whole bunch of stuff into the rivers and waterways.
If you look, we kind of always had one eye on it. We just didn't, but we never really had it formalized as far as this is your law.
Okay.
And so you do see smatterings of that in the old history where we've dipped our toes in there, maybe.
Right.
But it wasn't until the 60s when we were kind of like, the governor at the time was like, here you go. It gives you the blessing and says, go forth and conquer the EQ world too. Right. And that's been good for us in some ways, because you see states struggling, states that just do fish and wildlife, right now with the way future generations don't use the outdoors the same as they used to.
Right.
Hunting and fishing license sales are down.
Right. And if that's all you do,
and that affects us less. But it's also a detriment in the way that our identity is split too. Right. Who are we? Are we the game wardens? We're not really the game wardens. We're more than that. We're different than that, And sometimes that is kind of tough on a group like us.
Yeah. Absolutely, because depending where you work, I'm sure it changes. If you're in the Adirondacks, you don't have a whole lot of the environmental policies that you would closer to the city or dealing with the pollution type stuff, I would assume.
Well, yes and no.
No, really? Okay.
I mean, in any urban area, you're going to have more of the EQ stuff.
That's what I was thinking, yes.
But you do get that. And I used to work up in the Adirondacks for a few years, and you'll get, there's a lot of back roads where people just want to dump their trash, and they don't want to bother going to the dump or paying the garbage man,
Right.
And even though it's not as frequent, it looks 10 times as ugly when you run into it.
No doubt.
So it's a big deal, I remember a case up in the Ticonderoga area where there was a contractor, and Ticonderoga is a little city. It's not a big city, but it's still a very rural area. And there was a contractor who he was into a lot of demolition, of small houses and rebuilding, and he didn't want to pay to get rid of this stuff. And he made a deal with this landowner who had a property that was mostly of a steep grade type nature. You can dump everything here and cover it over. That'll help me get my property up so it's all level and nice and neat, and we won't tell anybody, and we'll just do this. And I kind of ran into it by accident, like a lot of things. You run into them by accident, and I was amazed at the scope of it. I mean, this several acres of this guy's backyard was literally just trash. Wow. With a light coating of soil over the top of it, and in an area like the Adirondacks, in a pristine place where you think this is the last place I'm going to see that. Right. So it's there. And you find it.
Yeah, no doubt.
And when you do find it, it's almost worse. It's almost harder to deal with, harder to clean up, and harder for judges, and people that just don't see it every day to know what to do with it.
Right. And I think about when we talk about our history and our back, I mean, the tanneries and stuff, when the first cases came that they were dumping all this, polluted stuff. I mean, again, it's a change of the times, and judges sit there and are like, in the 30s, I can't imagine the first pollution cases coming into a courtroom must have been, they like you said, they don't know what to do with it.
Yeah. I mean, how would you, know? And then, of course, you're going to get pressure from people to not do anything.
Right. Can you think of any of those big pollution cases? So, like the first big pollution case that you guys might have had in the history?
Geez, historically speaking?
Yeah.
Man, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of them. Mm-hmm. Kind of put me on the spot.
I did, and we should have done that in a pre-interview, but it just came to me, and I'm like, that would, I'm just curious because, like you said, a lot of us don't have that type of job or even, think about looking into it and stuff. And tanneries always come to my mind because New York was a big tannery state back at the turn of the century. And I know how bad all that environmental stuff that they dumped into the water, knowingly or unknowingly, because as we started testing stuff and learning what was bad for us, that was part of it too. We just didn't know what we were dumping in the water and how we were killing our fish and everything else, because I think a lot of people, if they knew, wouldn't have done it because they liked fishing and hunting back then probably more than so now. And they had a lot less of those animals too because their predecessors had killed everything to eat.
Sure. Yeah.
But that's just it's an aspect of your job, like you said. I don't see a whole lot, so I was just kind of curious if something came to mind.
Boy, not off the top of my head. I think it's a situation of there's so many, I just can't think of one.
And it's the situation of being put on a spot and asking a question like that too. So, the first conservation officer, police officer, or game protector killed in the line of duty?
Yes, first one, Sam Taylor. The year was 1914. So, and it's funny when you think about it, because the New York State Troopers didn't even come into existence until 1917.
Okay.
So, before there were even state troopers, we had already had our first officer killed in the line of duty.
Right.
And the story, in a nutshell, Sam Taylor and another officer were patrolling out near the Rome area. They were originally going out looking for waterfowl hunters, and they heard shots. And so they're kind of sneaking through, just like we would do today, right? Sneaking through the woods, up along the shores, up the banks. And they run across a couple of guys they're shooting songbirds, which is a big no-no, of course.
Right.
And
certainly weren't going to eat them.
Yep. And so they confront them, and like a lot of what would happen back then, the first thing they do is the guys lower their guns and start firing. And Sam Taylor took a 12-gauge point blank to the chest, and the other officer was uninjured, returned fire. So imagine that, here's two hunters, and then there's two game wardens, and all of a sudden everybody just starts firing, and it's probably bedlam, and Sam Taylor's laying on the ground and he's dying. And so the hunters flee, and his partner picks him up and physically carries him to the hospital.
Wow.
Because they don't have a car or anything nearby. So, and the hospital wasn't too far away, fortunately, but he physically carries him to the hospital. And Sam Taylor, despite the injury, and you know what a 12 gauge can do to somebody.
Yeah.
He actually did live through some of the night, and he died in surgery.
Wow.
Early the next morning. So that's how it happened. It's happened to a few other guys, over the years as well.
Mm-hmm. Sam Taylor, did they ever catch the guy that shot him?
Interesting story about that. They fled. They were both of Italian descent. One of them fled back to Italy.
Wow. One
of them made his way to Chicago, I believe. Now I'm really kind of paraphrasing the story because I haven't looked at it in a while. And we did a piece on it back at the 100-year anniversary. Mm-hmm. And so much time had gone by. By the time we actually found out where the one guy was in Chicago, the DA at the time, I believe, declined to prosecute. He declined to go forward with it and try to get him back here, which blows your mind, right? In this day and age. But back then,
shootouts were common.
That was just the mentality,
Yeah.
Geez, it's been 7 or 8 years, and he was just a game warden.
Yeah. Yeah, the beginning of law enforcement.
So yeah, there was really no justice for Sam Taylor. Yep. And it's interesting. And I probably am going to digress a little. You can cut this if you want, but but one of the stories that's always near and dear to my heart. It's not a New York story, but the Pogan Elms murders out in Idaho. And I always think about those because those only happened in the 80s. And
right.
Maybe I'm dating myself, but the 80s to me don't seem that far away.
No.
And so
I agree.
When you tell stories about the old game wardens back in the teens and the 20s, and these guys open fire on them, shoot them, wound them, maybe kill them. And then they kind of get away with it, and you think that could never happen today. But really, the 80s wasn't that far back. And, they did put Claude Dallas away for a little while, but he's a free man right today. Now. He's walking around a free man. Mm-hmm. And he shot 2 game wardens in the back of the head, point blank.
Yeah.
Like they were game.
Yes.
And so I guess the moral of the story is we all have to be vigilant.
Absolutely.
We all have to keep watch.
It can happen anytime, any place. And I think we do take it a lot more seriously today, than we did before. I think it keeps gaining and gaining, I hope. So some digression there. But, yeah, 1914, and, one went back to Italy, one went to Chicago, and then they don't prosecute because it's been 7 or 8 years. It's pretty sad even for 1914.
Yep.
Huh. I know, and you gave me a coin earlier that has quite a few names on it, actually. So through the years, we've lost quite a few officers. That's
right. Yeah, that's our fallen officer challenge coin.
And I noticed that. The memorial it shows on it has quite. It was full, at least on the coin, and certainly something that pins my heart too when I see that, and we have to memorialize that. So that means that they died in line of duty, doing something in protection of the natural resources of New York. And any others that stand out, stories like the 1914 story?
So Bill Kramer was an interesting story because he was actually shot twice. And again, I can't give you the dates like right off the top of my head, but Bill Kramer he had come a few years after Sam Taylor, and he had gotten shot in the face earlier in his career, and they were reasonably sure he wasn't going to die, but it was touch and go for a while there. He was beat up and shot pretty bad, and he came back to work. And a couple of years later, he got himself into another unfortunate situation, and that time he got killed.
Wow. Sounds like there was a lot of gunfights back then.
Yeah. And Bill Kramer worked down in the Queens area, Jamaica Bay, down near New York City, which, didn't look anything like it does now, of course. But it was still considered one of the most dangerous places to work, and just some things change and some things stay the same, right? We still go out all by ourselves sometimes, don't we?
Absolutely.
So,
yeah. And going to places that aren't readily available to other law enforcement officers for backup and things like that.
Yeah.
I just, and
it
may be coming, but can you find us?
Yeah. And everybody we talk to during hunting season has a gun.
But it's a very dangerous job, and that's one thing this podcast is, I think, brought to light, and talking to, game wardens like yourself around the nation is, it's a very dangerous job that we do. We work with people with guns and sometimes with tempers, and, we have incidents to this day. So to hear those old stories, they're not so old because they're relevant even today. And I totally understand where you're coming from with that. And Bill Kramer is certainly to get shot twice. What a brave man to go back at it
to come back to work, right?
Yeah, So as our history progresses, though, I mean, when did they go to a uniform and kind of started the structure for New York?
So the actual uniforms. And it's interesting because we're talking about Sam Taylor. The Sam Taylor incident really was a driving force behind the start of what we would call formal training and kind of professionalizing us, because that's when the decision was made that, yes, it's time for us to get uniforms. Yes, it's time for us to issue out firearms and not just have the guys carry whatever they feel like carrying. And guess what? Now we're going to train them on how to shoot. And so all those things kind of built off the death of Sam Taylor, So he was really the start. His death was the start of us becoming more professional.
Wow. So they started really in 1914 forming something.
It was very soon after.
Very soon after.
Yep.
Huh. And the first patches, were they?
So patches were kind of a thing. I like to think of it as like a World War I, World War II thing. That was when I think police agencies in general started looking more towards the military for how are we supposed to look.
Right. Insignia that
and I
way.
think that's how patches kind of grew out of that. So our first patch came out in 1952.
Okay.
That was the first time we put a patch on a uniform. And I think if you look around the country, a lot of states were pretty close to the same time period. It was probably just post-World War II, or maybe a little earlier, but not much, where you're probably 90% of the agencies, that's where the patch kind of idea came from. It was, let's get the uniform. If we're going to make them look professional, we probably have to make them look somewhat military, for lack of a better word.
And there was a lot of military people coming out of the service making those decisions as well.
Posing those ideas. And so
that's probably where the paramilitary came from. Is probably the same type of era too, because that's where we started making our patches, making our uniforms, and doing that type of stuff. Especially guys coming out of World War II, World War I, into jobs like these.
Oh yeah, well absolutely. Everything, the high boots, the bloused out pants with the big breechy sides on them, the breeches they were called.
Right.
Yeah, all that stuff was we were kind of taking those cues from the military and how we should look.
That's interesting because I've never really put that together. That at that time frame is where it was built, and it makes sense. I mean, I should have thought of it before, but I just you just put it all together for me. So that coming out, and hey, if we're going to be game wardens, we got to look like game wardens. And what's a game warden look like? Well, if we're going to have a patch, because that's what we did in the military. So we need a patch, we need a uniform, we need to look like this, we need to have, a hat, we need to have a cover, and then that starts building it all up. So
and guys were very against that in the beginning, because they wanted to sneak around, and just like we do now. We love it's during hunting season, right? We love to walk around in a cover coat, so they don't know who we are till we get right on top of them. Mm-hmm. And there were a lot of guys that were very against uniforms in the beginning, and there was actually a time. It's funny, we put together in the late 50s. There was I call it a secret service of game protectors. There were a lot of problems in the Adirondacks with a lot of these big hunting camps. They were very remote. It's very hard to get there. If you weren't part of the club, you weren't even getting within 10 miles of the camp. And so we kind of started like a little undercover force of guys. And so the uniform, as much of a detriment as it might have been as here comes the game warden, it got people used to seeing us that way. So that when someone came along in plain clothes, you were totally surprised.
Yeah.
It didn't take long for the culture to kind of change from, and only a few years prior, the game warden didn't wear a uniform.
Right.
So he could have been anybody. Now people kind of got used to the idea that they were going to see you looking like that.
Yeah.
And when they didn't see you looking like that, boy, those guys had a pretty decent advantage.
Oh, neat.
And so it's kind of interesting how things kind of come around and go around. Right.
Yeah, because we definitely like that. That's that undercover aspect for sure. And we do like throwing over the overcoat on and being right up there. And, I was running a decoy one time, and the landowner, there was some action out on the road. So he walked up through the woods to see what was going on. I was laying in the snow with my snow camo on. And it was just funny. He looks down, and I say, game warden. He's looking at me. He gets instantly mad. I can see how mad he is, and I'm like, oh, he has no idea what I just said. So I peeled my jacket back to expose my badge to him, and I said, game warden, and his whole face all of a sudden it comprehends. The game warden's here, and he's like, oh, sorry. I said, yep, we're working a detail here, so we're trying to catch road hunting, and then he's all happy. But before it was just that comprehension, like you said, from not understanding who this person was laying in the snow next to the road was to, all of a sudden the comprehension is just like a light switch goes on, and he's like, wow, oh yeah, it's a game warden. So, and with violators as well, when you catch them in the act or whatever, and when we're usually undercover as uniformed officers, we expose ourselves to them usually in a generally quick way rather than the big investigation where you clean up at the end, where undercovers come in and do like that. But, we do a lot of, like you said, throw a coat over and act like a hunter and walk up on hunters and say, hey, can I check your license, and, peel back our jackets and so they expose our badge so they know who we are. Or if you're a well-known game warden, as soon as you walk up and they see your face, they're like, oh.
Yeah. And it's funny, I've had people say to me, that's not fair.
Yeah, no, it's not, but they started with that. That's kind of neat that they started on that theory, and I can see the whole, no, I don't want to go, I don't want to, why would I want to wear that? Everybody's going to know who I am. And changing over to that, because, certainly seeing it deters violations. Mm-hmm. So, and there's a balance there to be met, today. So moving on into the history. So what other highlights can we bring out with the New York State Environmental Police history that we can talk about that's pretty cool?
Let me think. So if we want to keep going linearly, let's see.
Kind of like that.
We're kind of just past
going through the years.
World War II now. Yeah. So I guess an interesting thing about that post-war era is, and I mentioned it before, it was kind of like the dawn of the new era for people. It was the 50s. It was that time of prosperity, and people had, the work week was all of a sudden different, and people had more free time, and recreation was a thing, and people weren't just hunting to put meat on the table anymore. They were hunting because it was a sport to them.
Right.
And fishing too. People were, if you look at a lot of states, and it's that same pattern too, whether it's boating, all of a sudden everybody had a boat, and lakes that didn't have a lot of people on them. Now there were so many people on the lakes, people are like, holy cow, look at all these people out here. And then you get into boating accidents, hunting accidents, all these things, the statistics start to climb, and they want somebody to do something about that.
Right.
And law enforcement wasn't the only answer. Education was another part of that. It's a component of that. Mm-hmm. And that's always been in our mission statement. Education and public outreach has always been a part of our mission statement, as it is with a lot of wardens. Something you don't see in the traditional police officer mission statement or mandate. Mm-hmm. We kind of have that. We've always had that built in, and so we had been thinking as an agency and as a profession, we had been thinking about education long before the big boom of the 50s came along. Although we really never formalized it or did it on a grand scale, but we were doing it, and now it kind of became a formalized thing. And of course, and you see it in most states now where they still have, that hunter education, the law enforcement, the game wardens are the hunter education people.
Right.
Because we were the ones you had to turn to, who else were you going to get to do that? And New York State was one of the first ones to have hunter education, like a formalized hunter education class where you had to pass the hunter safety course to get your license.
Right. And
we did that. Part of the way we did that was we partnered with the NRA. And at the time, the NRA was really very small and insignificant. They were like a target shooting outfit, really, more than anything else.
Because nobody needed them. Everybody had guns.
Yeah, they were more of a, they were kind of into target shooting competitions.
Right.
So really, they weren't really into the hunting arena at that point.
And it's funny you say that because some of the old timers like, I got my NRA card.
Yeah.
Which started, like you said, that fundamental hunter safety. They actually thought it was, and it's just hunter safety. It's not the NRA card, but once upon a time it was.
Yeah. And all the old patches used to have NRA on them, because we were a partnership.
Right.
They were helping us to teach the classes, and the demand was so crazy, there would be, you might spend, and this is not an exaggeration, they'd spend 15 minutes like teaching these kids how to firearm safety because they just didn't have any more time. There were just so many people that wanted in on that. And so I think it's interesting that New York was kind of, you wouldn't think about it, but New York was kind of at the forefront of that. We were kind of the first ones that kind of led that hunter safety charge. And we kind of did that in partnership with the NRA. And as a byproduct of that, the NRA just became this powerful organization because they kind of tapped into this brand new, fresh growing resource that is, and those people are still there today supporting the NRA.
Right.
So that's kind of interesting. And our first hunter safety, I guess you would call him our coordinator back then. He was the guy that was in charge, the game protector who was kind of in charge of all the hunter safety. He's the guy that made all the big decisions. His name was Brian Bergen. And he was kind of he was like our star at the time. He was like our face. Brian Bergen was the guy that, if you were going to do a press release or a news highlight, you wanted to use Brian. And he was a huge guy. And I could show you pictures of the game wardens at the old training academy, and you'll see like all these guys, and then you'll see this one guy that's like a full head above everybody else, and that was Brian Bergen. And you see, he was a very big man, had a very one of those strong-chinned American faces, and he was very into that hunter safety type thing. And he was actually the first person that was inducted into the hunter safety. It's like their Hall of Fame, the National Hall of Fame for hunter safety. Brian Bergen was the guy that went in there first.
Wow.
Because he was the guy at the forefront of it all, in our state.
Neat.
And so that's kind of interesting.
Right.
And it's very funny because I go to all the WWII conventions and everything, and you go out west or even down south, and the minute you say New York, people think New York City, and
absolutely.
They don't realize that there's more to New York State than just the city, and
it's a big state.
And even the New York City area, it's so different than the rest of the state. That
but New York certainly labeled itself the city, and it's just like
you get that just because you get it,
Right.
But we're so much more, and it's just people don't realize it.
Yeah, that hunter safety aspect is pretty cool because as a trainee, I had to run the office sometimes, and I had to go out to the archives, what little we had, because it got burned in the 80s, our department. But I went out to pull a report from 1968 or 69. So I went out and pulled, it was a hunter-related shooting where someone had been shot and killed. I pull out this report, and it's front side and back side, and it's check-off boxes and blanks. And that's the investigation paper that they did. And I'm like, this is crazy. And then I look in, and there's like 6 others of these. So I'm like, for a small state like New Hampshire, and I'm like looking at like 6 other shooting deaths in 1968, 69. I don't remember the exact year, but it was significant, I would think, for our, a state that if we have one, that's a big deal to us now. But the influx of hunter safety and how important it was, because there were a lot of people were just pulling triggers at whatever moved out there. They weren't, hunter orange. They weren't identifying the target. They weren't doing all those 10 commandments. It was just a huge thing, and you can actually watch the reports dwindle as the years go on, and hunter safety is infused. And such a success story is hunter safety, because we went from having a lot of incidents to having rare incidents now. I call it rare, but no shooting's acceptable. But compared to what we had in the 60s, today is
Oh yeah.
And we more small game than deer, because everybody's wearing their hunter orange and doing the right things and identifying their targets and what's beyond. So
yeah, and it was one of the most convenient ways to get rid of somebody if you didn't like them. Oh, it was a hunting accident.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. A lot of those hunting accidents should have been probably
they were not accidents. Yeah.
And even today, they really get dug into because of that aspect. Mm-hmm. It could be the reason behind it. So you gotta vet all that stuff before you can even call it a hunter-related shooting, because I'm sure if we went back and the amount of homicides back then were probably significant compared to, people want to get rid of this person or that person, and
Oh yeah. We had one of our own game wardens, game protectors. I call them game wardens. It's so funny because you just think game warden, right? Mm-hmm. You just do. New York, technically we were never game wardens, but
you never had that title.
No, we never did. Game protector was the title. But, but you know how it is. You throw things around interchangeably sometimes. I mean, game warden's
absolutely.
Kind of
that's the one everybody
title,
keys on. In Pennsylvania just did a study, and because they are now game wardens, and they took a study group and asked them, what a conservation officer was, what this was, what that was, and then a game warden. Everybody seemed to, from all kinds of walks of life, identified what a game warden was. So they retitled their badges and stuff game wardens.
I was wondering what the story was behind that, because that's such a huge change.
Yeah, and they actually did research, which just I think it's the coolest thing in the world, and took demographics and brought them in and asked them questions, or did surveys to understand what they wanted to be called and why they wanted to be called, and everybody seemed to identify with a game warden. So and I that's why Wardens Watch, that's why I named my podcast Wardens Watch.
Right.
But still, one person asked me, so is it about a prison warden? And I just, it hurts when someone says that. So, but they don't identify with the warden as the game warden.
Right.
So, and those types of people, that's why, those aren't the people that I'm going to ever reach, because they don't understand it. But I'm hoping to reach those people that are out in the woods and still can identify with a conservation officer or game warden, because even though you're maybe a hiker or a biker or something like that, you're still an outdoor person, and you still care about wildlife and seeing wildlife. So, okay, that's a side topic, but we're back into history.
Now I learned something today.
Yeah, I know. It's some people don't like my rabbit trails, but I do.
No, I was actually very curious as to why they changed the name, and if there was an actual reason behind it that had some research to it.
Yeah, I'm very impressed that they did that and they went about that, and I'm wicked excited about the results. So we just need to keep putting it out there. So maybe we'll change New York State to New York State Game Warden.
I don't know.
Historically, no, we probably never happened. Hopefully your commissioner listens to this. Maybe you never know what happens.
Hey, we're open to anything.
Yeah. So continuing on in that time frames, we're getting, moving on to.
Man, there's so many different directions you can go. It's in the 50s were a time we tried a lot of different things. In the 50s, it was a time of experimentation. We started our first Marine unit And granted, it was short lived, but it was an attempt to kind of start a special team,
right?
Kind of based on a special need. And what do you see now all over the place? Every agency's got special teams to handle their special needs.
More so now than ever.
Yeah. So we were trying different things.
So you don't have a Marine unit right now?
We do. We have one again, of course, and it's come and go over the years in different forms. So, but yeah, back in the
those focus officers.
It was back in the late 50s, early 60s that we kind of started this Marine unit type thing to see if it would work. We had a motorcycle unit for a couple of years where we had a bunch of guys on cycles trained, up to do, whatever it is a game warden would do on a motorcycle. And we were just trying different things. The education thing was still, I don't know if the boating thing, you hear, make sure for life jackets, make sure.
That's the first time I heard that.
That was,
that's a New York phrase.
It must be a New York thing, maybe.
Yeah.
I've seen it around, but we've been using that since like 1960. And then the 60s were kind of that time where it was kind of like the end of that grand old era for the game protectors. It was, now change was coming fast and hard. The green era was there, save the planet, all that stuff was happening.
You guys had Woodstock.
Woodstock, you name it. Everything was kind of happening at that time. Things were changing so fast.
All in New York.
And all over the place.
Once again, at the focal point.
But now more than ever, or then more than ever in New York, sure. And so, like I alluded to earlier, we started kind of grabbing onto these other laws that were, maybe embedded in the public health law or in business law. And we consolidated everything. And we changed the whole department structure so that we weren't just about fish and wildlife. We were about, environmental quality too. And that was a huge change, And so the game protector title kind of went away, and conservation officer was the title that was adopted. Everything changed. The uniform changed. The badge changed. The way we trained changed.
You had a badge back then?
Yep. Yeah. We actually, it's funny. We used to have a pin back, we would wear right on our uniforms when we were game protectors. And then that went away when we became conservation officers. And I think we're the only fish and game agency in the country that doesn't wear their badge on their uniform. If I'm not mistaken. I can't think of a single one that does not wear it except for us. And I've been told the reason for that was, back in the early 60s, the only state agencies in New York were the game wardens, the game protectors, and the state police. And it was felt at the time, the state police had decided that they weren't going to wear their badges on their uniforms. It was going to be a wallet badge. And we were just kind of following suit with the state police to be kind of the same, because we were the only two state police agencies. And the feeling at the time was that the uniform was distinctive enough that you didn't need the badge there to enhance that at all. And in some ways it set you apart from the local constable or whatever, because they were wearing a badge, and so you kind of look different than them now.
Right. Having been shot in the badge, I'll tell you, I kind of like badges.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I like wearing the badge.
Yes.
But, but I'm an old school type thinker, being a historian. So fast forward to present day, the 140-year anniversary is almost upon us. And the idea, we had an anniversary committee, and one of the ideas that came out of that was an anniversary badge.
Ooh.
And that's not like our idea. Don't get me wrong. I'm not,
You had nothing to do with that.
Don't try to string me up, Wisconsin. I know you guys had the idea before me.
We had an anniversary badge as well.
There are a lot of states that have had anniversary badges as their anniversaries come, whether it's 100, 120, 140.
Yeah.
And so we decided that, it's time we do something like that.
I want to up you, but New Hampshire was 150. So.
Yeah, well, we may have stolen a few ideas from you. I don't want to implicate anybody, but
that's okay.
We may have looked at your stuff.
Great ideas are supposed to be shared.
We definitely looked at your decal. That was kind of neat looking.
Yeah, no doubt.
So we designed a badge, and we kind of did it, kind of going back to our roots. What was the iconic badge? And it was the game protector badge that was worn pretty much all the way through from the early teens all the way up to 1964. It was probably our longest running badge. Very distinctive looking, good looking badge. Yeah. And we decided that we were going to do an updated version of that as the anniversary badge. And so that we designed that. And then... are
you guys going to be able to wear them?
Well, it's funny you should mention that.
Because about my curiosity, I don't want to jump ahead, but I am like, I'm just,
We brought that idea to our director, who was very wise, and said, that's a great idea.
It'll stand out.
We should do that. And so our Class A, our dress uniform really isn't kind of made for that right now. You can see what I'm wearing, and it's just the wool with no reinforcements on it. But our Class Cs do have the badge reinforcements already in them.
Because everybody else has a badge except for you.
So it could be that.
Could be that.
But so we're already kind of made out for that, and the director was all for it. If the guys want to purchase an anniversary badge, they're free to wear it on their Class Cs.
That's going to be
and so
pretty
that's what
awesome.
we're going to do for next year. Yeah, so it'll be like the Game Warden of old, but with an updated look.
Are these going to be available to purchase for other people?
We've opened it up to the retirees.
Okay.
But outside of that, we have not.
Okay.
We really haven't given it much thought, to tell you the truth. I know that our Officers Association has purchased a few extras to raffle off at their conventions.
Yes, I can see where that would be. That's neat.
One may or show up at WWII at some point in a raffle auction type setting.
Yeah.
So there might be a few around, but we really haven't decided to go much farther than the officers and the retirees with it at this time.
And if you open it up, it's not special anymore.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
Just my opinion. So I think that's an awesome idea. I think that's a great idea, and it's definitely going to stand out because you guys don't wear badges. So
it'll definitely be different.
And then that's one thing. I think when we wore our anniversary badge, it was silver because that's and our normal typically is gold, but people still didn't really recognize it or ask questions. And I kind of wanted that to happen. I wanted to tell them it's the 150th year and this is, our anniversary badge and we're going to wear it for a whole year. And there was some conversations, but, I guess I wanted to have more. I was pretty proud of that. So, that's so I hope you have an opportunity to talk about, all these things, the 140th for you, and that anniversary badge and, the history of New York, Environmental Conservation Police. Now, the police part, what year did that come in?
So that was right, and again, it went all through with, it kind of flows quite nicely because right at the end of the 60s, when everything was kind of like consolidated, all the laws were put together, and the department changed its name from the Conservation Department to the Department of Environmental Conservation. And shortly after that, in 1971, we got our official police powers.
Oh.
So that's when we got the name police, added to our title. We didn't really put it on anything until a little bit later. 1978 was when it finally went on the patches and the badges too.
Were you the first one in the nation to put police on your patches and badges?
We might have been one of the first, but I don't think we were the first.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I'm trying to think.
That seems pretty early to me when you say that, because we still have an insignia of police, and there's quite a few that do, but there's quite a few that don't. So I think Rhode Island, Maryland, Texas.
I'm trying to think of actually where I saw police on an older patch, and I started thinking, boy, that's pretty early. And it wasn't our state. It was, I can't even, I'll think of it after.
Yeah, but you were definitely one of the early ones, I believe, to add that on. So that's pretty unique. So
yeah.
And here we are, going to be 2020 on the anniversary, 140 years of law enforcement in New York.
140 years. The Class A uniforms will get a citation bar with 140 years of service on it.
Nice.
With the New York State Excelsior insignia on one side and the little picture of the badge on the other side, the anniversary badge. The cars will get decals. I don't know where we got the decal idea from.
Yeah.
It might have been New Hampshire. But the cars are going to get decals to put on there, say 140 years of service, with some kind of a saying on it and a picture of a conservation officer. It's all coming along quite nicely.
Yeah. It's awesome. It's awesome to celebrate. It's awesome to promote your department and what they've done and what they've gone through in 140 years, from, game protectors to 8 guys to a force of 300, and the accomplishments through that to keep New York pretty pristine place, because it's a gorgeous state. From the Adirondacks to the Catskills out to the Great Lakes, it's just a very unique place. Your populations of wildlife are right up there. It's just, I think 140 years is something very proud, and I think each one of us is always proud of our state, and I can tell talking to you, going through the history here, that you're very proud of New York and where you've been, and probably because you live it as a historian every day.
Yeah. And, and it's tough. And, in the profession that we're in, sometimes, you go through ebbs and flows of morale. Mm-hmm. And it is nice to remind the guys sometimes that you should be proud, and that there are some milestones that are worth thinking about as big deals.
And the public should be proud of you guys, too, for what you've done and what you've preserved for them. Because ultimately, we work for the resource and the people that use it. And, when they look at that 140th, they should say, hey, if it wasn't for these guys, we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing now, whether we're enjoying the waterways or hunting, fishing, hiking. It's a huge accomplishment. And for all this to tell them, hey, it's 140th years, celebrate that what we've all accomplished together in that time, and that, we can still enjoy our environment and have that foresight and look into the future too.
Yeah. And and in an era where you see a lot of mergers and things like that, I don't think we're ever going to go away. We're very unique. We have a very special function. I don't think you could put us with the state police or anybody else. I don't think
you would lose something if you did.
I think the people of the state of New York would definitely lose something.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Because you can't maintain the type of speciality that we have in a big general soup like that the state police are, Yep. And that's not to undercut them or anything. They have a job to do too, but they're
very good at what they do.
And they're very good at what they do, but their job is so different than ours.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you would want to mix the two. Neither one would benefit from that.
All right. Everybody hears that I say we're the police in the woods, because that's how I describe it when I was going to do talks with, younger children. They understand what the guys in blue do, and, hey, we're the guys that do it in the woods. So, and this is our specialty, and this is and I think, looking nationwide, we are becoming more of the police in the woods, because when something happens in the woods, call the game warden, because he's the Swiss Army knife of law enforcement, as it's been said.
I like that.
Yeah, I stole that from somebody too. So I saw an article that said the game warden, the Swiss Army knife of law enforcement, and absolutely, because when I pulled up with my cruiser, I had about everything in the world you needed, and
Oh yeah,
need 300 feet of rope. Yeah, I got 300 feet of rope, and everybody looks at you like, you got 300 feet of rope. I'm like, yeah,
I know, right?
And it's not something that was issued to me. It was something that I begged, borrowed, and stole from, and threw it in, because you never know.
Right? Yeah. You need an axe? Oh, here you go.
Yeah.
Bolt cutters? Oh, here's some. Just everything. Yeah.
Everything, because we run across so many unique situations that all of a sudden you need something like that. The bolt cutters, you're funny. I got caught in a farmer's field, and he had locked the gate on me. Mm-hmm. I went in at 2 a.m. in the morning to work night hunters, and I came rolling out. It happened to be youth day, and he went into his area, and he locked it so no one else could go. So here's the game warden stuck behind locked gates. So the next day after I cut his lock off, I went and saw him with a new lock and said, hey, you locked me in, but here's your new lock. I had to unlock it my way.
That's right.
So, but I didn't have to spend an extra day there.
I never got locked behind the gate. I almost did once, but I've never had the pleasure. But when I first started, I was teamed up with an old crusty game warden who, they gives you advice as you go along, and one of his words of wisdom was get some bolt cutters, because sooner or later you're going to get caught behind a gate.
Sooner or later you will. Yeah, no doubt. So, and those old timers, they do pass that on, all that knowledge and all that experience. And I sucked it up from. When I landed with a bunch of very talented individual game wardens that I took all of their knowledge I could, and that's what historians do, and that's what you've been carrying through. So that's really cool that you can bring these stories to light, and the dedication of those guys through the years, and hopefully you'll be able to pass that on, Tom.
Yeah, and while we're on the subject of the retirees, if there's anybody out there listening that's thinking, a division historian is a good idea for them, I would throw this out there too. It's not just about collecting up the old stuff and preserving the history, although that is a huge part of it. I'm constantly trying to find, old uniform items and things I can use for displays and badges and hats and whatever, just not only just to preserve them, but to have them so that people can see them. I'm also trying to put together, PowerPoints that, so you can do like a kind of a who you are and what you do thing for people, but also give them some historical background to it. I put together a PowerPoint so that people coming out of the academy, the new recruits, can see this is where you come from, that kind of thing. And that's a big part of being the historian. But another part of the historian job that I really enjoy is the retirees. We all know our retirees they're out there. If you go to your officers association meetings or whatever kind of conventions you might have, there's retirees all over the place that still identify as game wardens, conservation officers, whatever you want to call them. They still want to be active. They still want to kind of be around the profession a little bit. And so I have, and it's nice because, the era of email, I have like a nice big email list of all the retirees. And so I can send out email blasts of, hey, we're doing this, or hey, we're doing the badges. Would you like one? Or we're going to do a qualification shoot. Do you want to come? Or it's kind of nice to throw those things out there. One of the things another good example of that is we back when the 1980 Olympics were in Lake Placid, our guys did a big security detail up there. We were a big part of keeping security up there. And so guys had access to carte blanche to like the athletes, to the hotels, to the back rooms, to the training areas, to everything. And they got special uniforms, special equipment. It was kind of one of those things. And I kind of wanted to do a display like that, but I didn't have anything from 1980. Yeah. And so I sent out an email blast to the retirees. Does anybody have anything so I can make a display? And everybody wants to help so much. Cool. And you get so much stuff. And then you put together this big display. It looks so great, from Olympic flags to old uniform moon boots. Remember the old moon boots absolutely. With the Olympic logo on them? To all this crazy stuff that, guys got their hands on. One guy sent me a puck from the Russian training when the Russians were training just before they lost a Miracle on Ice, Yeah. So, so many things, so many memories. And then they want to share, they want to give you that to impart on people that are working now. And I think the historian is like a great conduit to those guys, so that they can give back even though they're not here anymore,
Yeah, because they're part of that history, and we all want to give back.
And I can tell you it firsthand, they're a huge resource. Anytime I have a question about history, I can put it out to the retirees, and I will get an answer. Wow. And if they need anything from me, they know they can call. Yeah. And so, I get so many thank yous from retirees when I see them. Thanks for thinking about us. Thanks for keeping us in the loop. Thanks for making us feel included, and it feels really good. Yeah.
Oh, that's pretty important.
If you feel like I'm trying to tug on the heartstrings of people out there to get them to make historians, I am. Yeah. Because there is a lot of things you can do with that job besides collect dusty old hats or whatever. It's the sky's the limit,
No, I think it's an awesome position, and again, having the forethought to do that, so you can preserve that history and have someone designated to do that. It's an awesome thing, because how much history gets dropped through the cracks if someone's not in charge of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we don't want to do that. We're all proud of where we came in conservation law, and we all want to tell everybody about it, and we all want to share. And I'm just wicked happy that you've made me a part of your 140th celebration for the Environmental Conservation Officer Police in New York. So that's pretty special for me. So I'm really going to enjoy sharing that with everybody else. So
I'm glad you dropped by. I think what you're doing is a great thing.
I appreciate that.
I really do. I want to hear the story about how you got shot in the badge, actually.
Yeah, well, that's going to be a future podcast.
Maybe later.
For sure. Right. That's definitely going to be a future podcast. Thanks, Tom.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Please join me, Game Warden Wayne Saunders, and other game wardens on our adventures protecting wildlife, saving lives, and having fun, all while serving the public and the natural resources of our planet. Listen to the tales and experiences of those who work in the outdoors while being entertained with stories about encounters with poachers, wildlife investigation, murder investigation, near-death experiences, search and rescue missions, wildlife interactions from game wardens around the country and around the world. When I retired, I realized I couldn't let go of that legacy, but rather wanted to share the passion, the commitment, and the stories of those men and women that call themselves game wardens. This is Game Warden Wayne Saunders, and this is Warden's Watch.